these are your lesson 4 notes, and we're going to talk about solving absolute value equations. Okay, if you want to write that for the topic, you can. So let's look at this warm-up here. If the absolute value of x equals 7, what are the possible values of x? Hopefully you know that 7 or negative 7. Okay? If the absolute value of x equals 4, negative 4, what are the possible values of x? Okay, for number 2. Can you think of anything where if I took the absolute value I would get a negative 4? You're actually not going to be able to do that. So the absolute values are always positive. Okay, you can't get a negative absolute value. Alright, so when we're solving those equations, you're going to isolate the absolute value expression, so the thing in the absolute values. Then you're going to create two cases. Okay? So the inside of your absolute value equal to the positive and the negative value of the other side of the equal sign. Okay? Then you'll solve both equations and check for extraneous solutions. Okay? So, let's do number 3. The absolute value of x minus 9 equals 5. Okay, so the absolute value is actually isolated. We can skip step 1 and just create two cases, because the absolute value, if it equals 5, it could equal 5 or it could equal negative 5. Okay, so you're going to have two solutions with the absolute value, just like in the warm-up we had two solutions. Okay, so we're going to set x minus 9 equal to 5, and then x minus 9 equal to negative 5. Those are our two cases here. Okay, so one's positive 5, one's negative 5. Then you're just going to solve. Let me zoom in there. Then you're just going to solve for x. So add 9. X equals 14. Okay, and then add 9. X equals 4. Those are your two solutions. Sounds pretty easy, right? And you can check your work by plugging in 14. So 14 minus 9 would be 5. That absolute value is obviously 5. Or plugging in 4. 4 minus 9 is negative 5. That absolute value is negative 5. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and skip number 4, and let's talk about some of the other ones where you have to isolate the absolute value first. Okay, so let's go to 5. So we have the absolute value of y minus 1 plus 17 equals 23. So your step 1 is to just isolate this absolute value. That has to be alone before you can split up into the positive and negative. So let's subtract 17 from both sides. Okay, and 23 minus 17 is 6. Alright, and so now that the absolute value is by itself, you can split into positive 6 and negative 6. So y minus 1 equals 6, and then y minus 1 equals negative 6. Okay, and then solve those by adding 1 to both sides. Y equals 7. And then add 1. Y equals negative 5. Okay? So for 6 here, you would just divide both sides by 3 first, and then split into 13 and negative 13. Okay? So that'd be m plus 8 equals 13. And then m plus 8 equals negative 13. Okay, and solve those. You should get m equals 5 and m equals negative 21. Okay, let's talk about 7, and then that'll be it for the first page. Number 7, we have 16 times the absolute value of r minus 5 equals negative 32. Alright, so our first step is to isolate the absolute value. We're going to divide both sides by 16. And so the absolute value of r minus 5 equals negative 2. Okay, so some of you probably want to split this into negative 2 and 2. Okay, however, we can't have an absolute value be negative. Okay, so there's no solution here. Okay, you can't just do that right away. You need to isolate the absolute value, and then if it still equals a negative, that's no solution there. That will never happen. Alright, so for example, I'm not going to do this whole thing out, but for example, number 8, you may want to say no solution right away because you see a negative here. However, isolate the absolute value first, and you'll see that it actually does equal a positive 12. Okay, you can solve that if you want. You don't have to, but that's an example where even though something on the left equaled a negative, you can't just stop and say no solution. You have to isolate your absolute value first. Okay? Alright, so the next page is just more. Okay? So let's skip around here and do 10 first. Okay, because this equals 0. So our first step would be to times both sides by 9. So we get the absolute value of 3a plus 12 equals 0. Okay? And so now we can split into positive 0 and negative 0. However, positive 0 and negative 0 are both 0. Okay? So this actually just gives you one solution. Okay? If you wanted to split, you'd have 0 twice, because negative 0 is the same thing as 0. So since they're the same exact equation, that's why we just get one solution. So let's find out what that is. Subtract 12 and divide by 3. A equals negative 4. Alright, so that's 10. Okay, let's do one more for practice 12 with these fractions, and then we'll talk about when you have variables on both sides. Okay, so not much longer. Let me erase down here. Alright, number 12. So again, we have a negative on the left, but we haven't isolated the absolute value, so don't stop and say no solution. Alright, think about doing PEMDAS backwards, SADMEP. So when we're isolating this absolute value, you definitely want to subtract or add first. Okay? So let's subtract 8. Negative 16 minus 8 is negative 24. Okay? And that equals negative 12 times the absolute value of k over 5. Those canceled. Okay? So now you can see we divide or multiply next. So let's divide by negative 12. Okay, and this becomes a 2. So we now do not have an absolute value equal to a negative. Okay, so you want to split it. Even though 2 is on the left, it's fine. You'll have 2 equals k over 5. And then negative 2 equals k over 5. Times both sides by 5 for both of them. And you'll get 10 and negative 10. Alright, so most of these are going to have 2 solutions unless you got 0 like we did for 10. Okay, but so far we've only had variables on one side. So what happens when you have variables